My name's Amber, and thank you all for being here today at our workshop, which you all know because you signed up, but we're talking about social enterprise, legal structures and access to capital. We've aimed this pretty high level, so it's sort of an intro, getting used to some concepts, and talking about what we see as common approaches or common structures from our experience working with social enterprises. But also this is quite an informal space, so feel free to ask questions. So our two presenters today, I'll be jumping in and chief slide operator. We've also got Gareth Worthington from Russell McVeagh, and Steven Moe from Parry and Christchurch. So
I'll go first and then you. Kia ora koto, ko Steven toko ingoa no o tautahi ao. My name is Steven Moe and I've flown up this morning from Christchurch. So greetings from Christchurch. I've been working in social enterprises for a couple years now. I always have to explain that I have an accent. You probably picked that up. I actually moved to New Zealand when I was 7 years old. So you have to be careful when you hear people's accents. It may not be the full story. We moved here in the mid-1980s and my dad had a job as a marine biologist, which brought us to New Zealand. And I studied at Canterbury University, and then I worked here in Wellington for 3 years at Russell McVeagh, actually, and then went overseas for 11 years and was working in London, Tokyo, and Sydney, all for a big international firm. So there were 4,000 lawyers in 55 offices, so a very different scale to New Zealand scene. But came back 3 years ago, and my kids came home singing the Australian national anthem. So we thought, actually, there's an identity forming here. Where do we want to be? And we decided to move to Christchurch. And since then, I wrote this little book called Social Enterprise in New Zealand, a legal handbook, which is now, I've emailed this to literally hundreds and hundreds of people. And hopefully it's been a sort of a resource giving pointers about some of the things we're going to talk about today. And I've also been doing a podcast where I interview people about their stories, trying to develop an ecosystem about understanding where people are at on their journeys. So it's not purely social enterprises, but probably 60 of them are, and then another 30 are with charities, not-for-profits, and just generally people I think are interesting. So I'll give out some information at the end about that. But that's had about 26,000 listens now across all 90 episodes. So it's a way to try to build up the ecosystem here in our beautiful country. And I'll start sharing about our topic today, but first.
Yeah, me briefly. So I'm a corporate lawyer by trade. I've worked around the globe as with Stephen. And I do a lot of capital markets work. I have advised from your first stage startup all the way through to your listed entities and everywhere in between. From a social enterprise perspective, I have been on boards of charities, I have advised on structuring, advised on the contracts that the entities entered into, and of course on the fundraising side of things as well. Obviously, you know, very, very legal focused. What's the best terms you can get as a social enterprise when you're raising capital, things like that. So that's me in a very brief nutshell. So I'll let Stephen kick into it.
Yeah, all right. I have an avocado here. I wonder why I brought this. Is anybody feeling hungry? It was very expensive, I'll tell you. This is not the right time to use this illustration because this cost a lot of money. The reason that I have this, well, I actually have a question for you, which is what could we eat if we wanted to? What would you make? What's a good recipe? Guacamole. Delicious.
smashed avocado on toast.
Smashed avocado on toast.
I'm hungry now. Chocolate vegan ice cream.
Okay. Oh, that sounds pretty good. So the real potential of this avocado is to give us healthy sustenance, isn't it? It's good for us. It's a superfood. That's the true potential. Or is it? What's the true potential of this avocado? What's inside the avocado? There's a seed. And if we cut it open and if you actually got some toothpicks and put them in and put it in some water, I don't know if you've done this with children, I do it with my kids, and you can actually make the avocado grow. And if I could have brought it with me, I would have brought a little tree that I've been growing that came from an avocado like this. So I think it's just important to frame our discussion today around why are we here. This is more than just legal structures, which is potentially a pretty boring topic. What we're actually here is how can we resource and empower people who have good ideas to build things that are of worth, that this seed has the potential to grow a tree, which then could yield many, many other avocados. So that's the little picture that I want to start with, is we're not just talking today about companies and trusts and things. There's a deeper underlying current here about we're actually trying to empower people in their quest to do good. So let's come back to that picture, because when you think about the avocado, what is it going to need? It's going to need soil, water, nutrients, someone to look after it. And it's the same with a startup or a new venture. You need to have the right conditions, the right ecosystem for the avocado to grow. And unfortunately in Christchurch it's pretty cold, so my one will probably never produce fruit, but it needs that care and attention. And I think for us as lawyers and for some of you as advisors, the question is how can we support and empower people with the right conditions so that their ideas can actually grow and they can bear fruit. So that has nothing to do with legal structures, but I hope it sets the foundation for what we're here to talk about. To start with, I just want to ask a question, which is what is a social enterprise? Because I think that term, if we went around the room, we're not going to because there's quite a few of you and it would take a long time, but the actual term itself is full of meaning. And I think people have different interpretations about what we're actually meaning when we say social enterprise. So I think we need to get our baseline set about what we're even talking about. The way that I describe social enterprise is there's paradigms colliding in our world today. The old paradigm, let's think about that. The old paradigm was if you have a friend who wants to do good, they're going to go and start a charity. And the charity is probably being started because of their heart. Their heart is leading them. There's motivations of the heart. If you have a friend who has a great business idea, they want to do a tech startup, they're going to be the next Facebook. They're not going to start a charity, are they? They're going to probably start a company, and they're probably going to be talking about incubators and angel investors and getting funding and capital. And so the old paradigm says, if you want to do good, charity is the best way. And if you want to make money and have profits, then business is the best way. And what I think social enterprise does nicely is it combines the heart of charity and the mind of business and says, actually, there's a different way here that meets in the middle. Let's take the heart of what you want to do, and let's take the mind of what you want to do and combine them to create a business. The current label for that is social enterprise. I think social enterprise as a term has baggage already. And so recently I've been moving away from the term social enterprise because I feel like it can actually be a bit limiting. For one, social, like, does social encompass environmental change as well? What about cultural? Like, what does social actually mean? I think it has a danger of being pigeonholed as this, and I think it's actually broader. Because what I'm talking about here is the old paradigm was the charities with their hearts were doing good, the businesses with their minds were making profit, and there wasn't much connection. The new paradigm is saying, actually, there's a combination here. The word social enterprise as is a stepping stone between the old paradigm and the new paradigm. So I actually hope when we are sitting around having a glass of wine in 20 years that we look back fondly on the fact that we used to call social enterprise, and actually will have moved into this new paradigm which has seen much more crossover between the doing good and the making money. And we won't even need the term social enterprise because mainstream businesses will have moved so far in the direction of having a heart, caring about their employees, knowing what sustainable development goals are, that will actually have moved into this new conception, new paradigm. So that's kind of just giving you a rough outline, I guess, of my own thinking. And this has developed a lot. Even since I wrote that, it's changed. You know, this is a dynamic, organic area. One thing that Amber and I have been involved in is some research about social enterprises in New Zealand. And so that's going to be released next Wednesday. And that's actually quite a major report about the state of social enterprise in New Zealand, and particularly looking at legal structures and what the future may look like or could look like. So be watching on Wednesday, I guess. It's going to be launched here in Wellington. And that's not just a superficial report. It's, you know, more than 100 pages of content, because we interviewed 20 social enterprises across the country. And we've asked lots of questions. Each interview was an hour or two. The ones I was in, they went a long time. I don't know about the ones you were in.
Mine were more concise.
Right, yeah. Well, we had a lot of questions.
It was great. It was social enterprise. We were interviewing some who are startup and some who have been around for 70 years. We also interviewed people in the wider sector, so charity services and IR and accounting firms and funders. So it tried to get a look at everyone that we could access, and then say what are the challenges social enterprise are facing that are associated with legal structures, and then we've tried to explain that. So
yeah.
What's the name of that report?
Structuring for Impact.
Yeah. Yeah. So I haven't dove into the types of legal structures, but I hope you can understand why, which is, I think the framework or the context of where we're at right now is important to understand before we get to the detail, which we will come to. But the name of the report is significant, I think, because it has the word impact in it. And that's the term that I'm leaning more towards, which is the idea of impact companies rather than using the word social enterprises. Yeah, so we could go many directions right now because there's lots of content here that we could talk about. The one thing that I would say is that for me, social enterprises is this combining the profit and the purpose, but it's actually saying profit is less important than purpose. If your purpose is right, that's the key thing. That's what sets you apart as a social enterprise. That's the North Star that will keep you in line. Because for any startup, at some point, there's going to be a temptation where profit is going to be, there's going to be a thing that you want to do because of the profit reasons rather than the purpose reasons. So I think purpose is what really sets a social enterprise apart. And so being clear about what that purpose is and how you report on it is a really big criteria for being a social enterprise. And we go into that in the report and talk about it a bit here too. So if anybody's interested in any of this, just drop me an email. I've written quite a lot of articles and things since this book came out, so there's a lot of resources out there, I guess.
Can I ask you a question? You use the term impact companies.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you use companies and not impact enterprise? Doesn't enterprise be more, I guess, aspirational rather than an old term like company?
Mm.
Just an observation.
Yeah, it could be.
I think that's a great question, and it talks about or reflects on the evolution of what we're getting to. And so it segues really nicely into maybe now talking about some of the structuring options. And what we found through our interviews is the company structure that we currently have being the most flexible thing that exists for an enterprise, and offering some key advantages that social enterprise were looking for. That was the starting point. So other structures we'll get to as well, more restrictive, already overladen with features and conditions and restrictions. So starting from a really open, enabling, flexible starting point, and then seeing, okay, well, what are the features that we need now for social enterprise to be identifiable and accountable? So I think, but absolutely right, where it moves on from that, we'll see.
Yeah, but I mean, this is why it's a fascinating topic, and we could easily talk for a very long time, you know, charities and how they fit in within social enterprise. Where does all the categories fit. A friend of mine, Tim Jones, who some of you may know, who's B Corp ambassador in New Zealand and has his own B Corp, and he's at Kilmarnock Enterprises, which is a social enterprise in Christchurch, which is also a charity. But he was commenting the word enterprise actually is quite an interesting, if you look at what does the word actually break down to, it's like enter and prize, like prize it away. Enterprise, it almost has a grabbing quality to it, which I thought was kind of an interesting observation. I haven't gone back to the Latin roots or anything, but you know, that maybe there are better words that could more accurately describe it. So what we might do now is just turn to look at some legal structures and just consider the different options. So we've got 3 that we've put up here, and the reason that we've chosen these ones is that these are really common, and some of you will immediately identify with one or the other. I'll just briefly run through the pluses and minuses of each of them maybe. So looking at the company structure, the key benefit of a company structure is that you can actually issue shares, and that means that you can take on investors and you can raise money, which is really important, because if you look at the charitable structure, which I think we put trust there, you know, the charitable trust, you can't issue shares in your entity. You can't raise money through backing from investors. So it really, for charities, it's very much the old paradigm of, please give me some money. Please, can I have some? I'll fill in this grant form. At the same time, many social enterprises, which are companies, have been led from their heart to start these endeavors. And so they actually often align really closely with the grant-making institutions. So they will go to a community funder, for example, and what they want to do is amazing. They've got great ideas. They want to empower the youth or people who have disabilities or whatever it is. But the question from the funder, the grant maker, the first question, often in the forum, is, what is your charity number? And that's because there's a hurdle that people have jumped over to become charities. So it's an easy criteria for the grant makers to choose, well, we'll give you some money, but not you. But the reality is many of these companies are actually doing huge amounts of work. We didn't really talk about this before, but often what a social enterprise will do is the very existence of the social enterprise will be advancing some goal or having some impact. So whether that's through the people they employ, the products they make, the way that it's distributed, it's actually the whole ethos of the entity itself is advancing impact. And that's quite rare. You know, like think of a cafe model. You know, if a cafe, which is actually a super hard business to get into, a cafe employs people, they serve coffee, and that's a business. But what if the cafe employs people who have just come out of prison and wouldn't get employment otherwise, and the coffee that they serve is sourced from this and this other place? So it's thinking bigger about the model and how you're actually having impact through every step of your business. So coming back to this, the company can raise money, but often it has a social heart or some reason to exist. So investors are kind of looking at it twice, going, okay, well, am I going to get dividends? How is this working? But they can't access the grant funding from the community grants or, you know, councils or whatever, because they aren't a charity. And equally, the charity can't access investor funds because they can't issue shares. So you end up with this, there's pluses and minuses of both structures. And usually, my question all the time is, where do you want to be in 10 years? Don't tell me in 3 months or a year, just what's your ideal scenario in 10 years? Because the charitable structure, if you have a plan to sell the business and the IP is going to be worth a lot of money, then the charitable structure is not your best option, because you won't own, there's no private gain from charities. So you have to get that clear. And this is a true story. We've had clients who've come and said, I mean, it's amazing. They've worked for 15 years setting up a charity, developing the IP, developing the networks throughout New Zealand. Amazing. They've won so many community awards. They've been recognized. It's wonderful. Everyone agrees. Big pats on the back. They come to retire. They come to move on. And that's it. There's no way that they can benefit privately from this amazing thing that they set up. So it's just important to think through these criteria at the start. And the reason why social enterprise has the potential, I think, is if you set up a charity, you can pay yourself and you can have market rates, and that's good. But if you did develop something truly amazing, you will to benefit from it privately at the end of the day, so in 5 years or 10 years. And so I think that's a shame in a way. I want to encourage more people to embrace social enterprise in the it's okay to make profit from this sense. Because what I often see is that people they have an attitude, which is the old paradigm that we talked about before, which is I have to become a martyr to charity to prove how much good I'm doing in the world. Therefore, I must be a charity. And social enterprise, the opportunity of it is saying, actually, that's fine if you want to do that, and I heartily applaud you, wonderful, but there is another option if you can have a business model that works and actually make money from this as well. So those are just some considerations. And then the third part of this slide, it's got the charitable trust owning a company. So in this model, you're trying to get the advantages of both of the structures. So because like we said, the trust can't issue shares, but it can own shares. So if it actually owned 100% or part of a company, then it can actually benefit from what it's doing. So I mentioned the name Kilmarnock before, like that's an example in Christchurch, where it's a charitable trust that owns a company. The company employs 100 people who have disabilities, who maybe wouldn't have employment otherwise. When you go into New World or Countdown or whatever, you're buying chocolate off the shelves. They have refined the chocolate from the big containers into the packages. When you fly Air New Zealand and you put on the headphones with the little foam things, they've put the foam things on. So they're actually have employment and they're being paid, but they're also providing a service and things. So that's an example. Another one would be Stepping Stone, again in Christchurch. Lots of great things in Christchurch. But Stepping Stone is, they're a charitable trust that has two companies. And the companies, the aim is that they are a stepping stone between prison and employment. So you get out of prison, it's awfully hard to go to your first job interview. And they provide employment for people to unpack containers, like if you're moving from country to country. And they also have a business that builds seating for arenas. So really interesting businesses. But the point is, through their business, they're employing people, and therefore they're having impact. Whereas a traditional charity might say, we want to provide education resources and provide courses for the people exiting prison about how to get a job, give them job interview skills. This is going that next step and saying, actually, we're giving you the job, and then, transition into other things. So it's an amazing way to combine the heart of charity and the mind of business, if you like. So those are just some options that we wanted to put up on the screen.
Steve, just before we move on,
Yeah.
Are you going to talk at all about the governance that sits over each of those, or the advantages and disadvantages of that?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can talk about governance. It's interesting. Let's talk about governance. That's a small topic. The interesting thing is that the traditional paradigm that we're talking about, where you do good and you have a heart, oftentimes relies on volunteers. Volunteers sometimes won't have the governance skills that would be helpful sitting around a boardroom. They may not have the accounting or the financial or the know-how. So this is a major problem I guess, for charities is actually how do we get skills in our boards which recognize that it's mainly volunteers doing this.
The reason I asked it, I'm sorry, I don't want to
Yeah.
sort of hijack what you're talking about, but you know, I've had experience with a couple of charities where the founder of the charity, who's got the heart and
Yeah.
does all the good work and all the rest of it, has lost control of his charity because
Yeah.
the trustee determines who is appointed as trustees.
Yeah.
And the founder has actually lost control of his entity
Mhm.
and in fact has found himself quite an acrimonious sort of situation. And with people who started with the best intentions but have sort of now driven a different direction for the charity, and this person can't get rid of them.
Yeah.
Whereas with a company, if you're the owner,
Yep.
you can actually have more control over who are the directors.
Yeah.
So from my experience, and I'm not saying this is general for all trusts, but my experience, you can run into a sort of like a disconnection between the governance and the
Yep.
vision for a charity, and can't do much about it.
Yep. Yep, I agree with that. I mean, the one comment I'd say there is it's important to get the right trustee in place for the context and what it is that you want to set up, because there are ways that you can build in processes for trustees to be appointed, for example, and that the donor or the one who kicks it all off can't just be removed as easily, you know, so the other day I was reviewing a trustee, and it was literally someone had copy pasted an Australian trustee. So they had cross references. I don't know if you've ever had this. It was awful because it was cross references on how you wind up your charity that were referring to Australian entities and Australian commissioners and things that did not apply here. So I'm left looking at this deed going, well, how do we undo this? Because the deed is the Bible for this charity. But the point is that they were trying to cut corners. They went on Google, they copy pasted, and they didn't think through, actually, we need to make this bespoke, which I think obviously we have a vested interest in this as lawyers, but talking to a lawyer can be helpful to understand these are the bits you can push and pull, you know, to make it more appropriate for your context. And same with startups, frankly, you know, with founders and shareholders agreements and things. But if it's okay, I'd like to stop talking now and move to the next topic, because this one's really important as well as the structuring.
So sorry, just before you start, Gareth, just a reminder to everyone, we've got a drop-in session after this, so directly
Right.
afterwards over in the Akina space. So if you have more discrete or specific questions about, like, who you see trustee, how does that work, how does that fit into the structures, then come and talk to us then, because we're happy to talk about that in some more detail as well, and maybe cover some of the more technical
Examples.
basics.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
So-
good.
Cool. So let's talk about the money, because that's what you're going to need to achieve your purpose, run the enterprise, and hope to make a profit, depending on whether you're charitable or not. And what I want to talk about for the next little while is basically when you've found somebody to give you money, whether that's you as a founder, whether that's somebody else. I want to talk about the fish hooks, what you need to look out for, what you can put in place for protections, and just the different forms that putting money in can take. And we've basically got, and this, by money I mean capital. So basically I'm using the terms interchangeably. It's money that comes into business. You buy, whether it's a machine to produce some great product, whether it's to develop some IP for your service, whatever it might be, the money that you need to run. And so I'll cover three sort of broad areas. We'll cover debt, loans, etc. We'll cover equity, shares, and very briefly we'll cover grants, because grants are quite restrictive, as sort of Stephen alluded to earlier. So I want to start with debt, because everybody pretty much understands debt. It's the loan you get from the bank for a mortgage. It's a personal loan. It's a credit card. It's all these type of things in the business context. And so there's some really good advantages of debt, and I think the sort of main glaring one is that it doesn't come with a loss of ownership control. As we discussed earlier, and as we'll come to in a bit, with sort of some equity investments, you can lose some of your control. But debt, somebody writes you a check, you pay some interest on it, and they don't care as long as they're getting paid and they get repaid at a certain time. You can still run your business how you see fit, achieve your purpose, no interference. Another advantage, debt can often be available at an earlier stage. Again, whether that's coming from you as a founder, friends, family, other institutions, etc. I'll caveat this on the basis that it can be available at an early stage, usually with some security. It can be, putting your house on the line. It could be that you've had enough money put into the business that's got assets you can put on the line, something like that. And debt, I don't know if you've heard the saying, but debt is often cheaper than equity. And so I'm going to scribble on whiteboard very briefly at a very basic level. So by way of example, say we've got a $200 business, oops, $300 business then, because I've written a three. $300 business, half of it is debt at say 10%, just for a random figure. And so we're paying $15 a year for the debt. $150 is equity, so your shares or whatever it might be. And assuming we're just paying out all profits, and say $50 profits. So with this, you're paying $15 out of your profits or your revenues to debt, and then you as founder have got $35 left over. Great. If instead of debt, it's all equity, but you've got yourself and one other person in there, all of a sudden you're splitting your $50, $25 each. So as your founder, you're now getting $25, and previously you got 35. So that's what I mean in a very high level sense when debt can be cheaper than equity. Of course, it depends on what this figure is here, but in that very simple terms. Related to that is the interest is tax deductible. If you're a tax-paying entity, you can deduct it from your profit. So that is obviously a useful thing in business. You're paying less tax on the revenues. Can be quite flexible debt. Usually depends who you're borrowing from. Banks are pretty damn inflexible, as I'm sure you do. But there are other options. Bank funding is inflexible. Government funding, they've got special purpose vehicles, can be really quite flexible, can be really long term. Other areas like iwi funding can be really good rates for members of the tribe or sort of related to assisting the iwi. On the other side of the coin, the cons of debt, of course, getting it. So usually you need some sort of stable trading income. So if your income is very fluctuating, then that can be difficult. Usually need some sort of security, as sort of mentioned before. And the corollary of that is that if you don't meet your payments and you can't repay it, then the bank or whoever it is going to come in and basically take your assets and probably sink your business, liquidate it. So that's a real risk around debt. So where does debt come from? As I'm sure you guys are probably quite aware, it's quite different for early stage versus late stage companies. From early stage, again, for your founder, what is referred to as the 3 Fs, which is typically suggested to be friends, family, and fools. If you ever call an investor a fool, you're not going to get much money from them, I suspect. I like to refer to fools as the faithful, and it's actually a key source in the social enterprise impact investing space, because what you've got your customers and you've got people who've already brought into your mission. And so you can go out and you can talk to them directly. You can crowdfund through one of the platforms like Pledge Me or one of the others. And actually that can be potentially one of your easiest sources of funds without reaching into your own back pocket. So don't call your investors fools. That's takeaway. Other things, other areas where it can come from, don't discount supplier credit. Obviously, there's standard terms of supply of goods and services. Use it. That's what it's there for. Angel investors, your Icehouses in Wellington, your Angel HQ. There's an angel investment network in pretty much every decent-sized city in New Zealand, so take advantage of those. Venture capital, talk about government funding, provincial development unit at the moment, big source of funds, and if you can link it to something in the regions. You got your finance companies and your other non-bank lenders, a bit more expensive than banks, a bit less restrictive in terms of who they'll lend to. You got your banks, you got your public markets as well. That's usually for your bigger entities, your sort of Meridians of the world type thing, and the green bonds, the social bonds, things like that in the debt space. But there's also a smaller publicly listed bond/debt space. There are exemptions in the securities legislation where you can make what's called a small offer. We can raise from 20 investors up to $2 million in any 12-month period. So that's an alternative to sort of your crowdfunding model. And so you can, again, go out to your customers and just say, hey, 20 people, can you chuck in some money for me? And that way you obviously have more control over the terms. And that's the next bit, the terms of your debt. Obviously, a really high interest rate is going to sink you. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe if cash flows are huge. But that's a key thing to look out for. Time frame of repayment, whether there's the ability to extend it, because you might not have the cash by the end of that 5 years or whatever it might be to pay it back. Priority amounts, which is a complicated way of saying who gets first dibs on your assets if you don't have enough money to pay all your debts. Obviously, if a funder takes priority over all your assets and you'll put some money in as founder, then you're sitting at the back of the queue. And what security guarantees, etc., is your house on the line with your debt.
And I'd just say to that point as well, Gareth, linking both presentations together at this point, really important to look at if you're putting up personal security, but it's a charitable entity or you've restrictions in your rules that you can't get any private gain from it. Really think about sort of who are you asking to put up their personal risk if they're not going to be able to privately gain. So it's something community groups really need to think about. Who do they have? What assets do they have? What kind of security can they really offer? Because there's not the temptation there or the motivation of having a share of the profits at the end of the day if it's successful. So.
Yeah. And it actually goes back to the martyring point made earlier. You don't want to give all of yourself to the charity and then also lose your house. I mean, that's just. I mean, some people do that, but
Informed risk.
Yeah, exactly. You do want to look after yourself as well. So that was debt in a very brief nutshell, and that, as I've alluded to, applies to charities and profitable businesses. We'll move on to equity now, which, as Steven mentioned, very much focused on your profit-making businesses. There's a huge amount of flexibility in equity, and by equity I'm talking about shares primarily. I'll come into various variations on it soon, but your charities can't really do equity. There is one charity we're aware of that issued what's called redeemable preference shares, which is usually a sort of hybrid of debt and equity. But looking at the terms of those issued, it effectively became debt. All the terms were such that it was basically a loan. So I think the rule of thumb still applies. If you're a charity, you can't really do equity. So companies, equity. So think about ordinary shares being your basic vanilla rights to profit, rights to vote, all that sort of thing. These are often an easier method to raise capital than loans, because obviously with the security and income points made earlier, you get people who'll come in. They don't require interest payments on their debt, on their investment. They're bought in the most literal sense of the term, and they're taking the risk with you. They can't tip you into liquidation, but of course they will have their own demands usually.
But with that, they might also bring more than just money, and that can be a really great advantage of equity if you're bringing people on board who also have networks and have skills,
Yes.
and they can actually offer you more than just their capital.
Exactly, that's an excellent point. And yeah, obviously because they've got skin in the game, they've got a vested interest in making all that available to you as well. So it can be really useful. Mentioned security. What equity can also give you is the asset base I talked about earlier. You get in a couple $100 of equity, all of a sudden your business now has $200, and you can use that as security for your debt. So you can leverage it and go from $200 to $400 or whatever it might be. So that can be really useful. As mentioned, equity is really flexible. There's such a huge range of terms that you can have with equity. It goes from your ordinary shares to different classes of shares, which might have, say, different voting rights for one class versus another, different rights to dividends, different rights on liquidation, all that sort of thing. You've got things called convertible preference shares, where you as an investor can choose to convert it from whatever preference you have to ordinary shares at some point in time, if you want to support it that way. Things called redeemable preference shares, as alluded to, where you've got these shares, but the company or the investor, depending on the terms, can redeem them and get paid out at some point in time. Various fixed interest variations, where it's partly debt, partly equity. Options to acquire equity, where you pay for a right now to have the right to buy shares at a certain price in the future. So many options. I want to talk to you, which won't have time in this initial session, but I wanted to talk to you about the Icehouse angel investment approach, because they are sort of the big entity around angel investing in New Zealand. So what they've basically done is they have set out almost a set of standard terms they invest on in terms of equity, and it's a really sort of fascinating look at what protections they want, what restrictions they have, and things like that. So I'll go into that after the session, if you guys have time to stick around and want to talk about that. And it sort of ties a bunch of these very flexible factors into what you can see can come from angel investors. So got sort of sidetracked from the advantages of equity. Better look at the disadvantages. Of course, the key disadvantage is you can end up ownership. That obviously can have some negative consequences in terms of possibly diluting your purpose, your control over what decisions are made, things like that. But the point to be aware of here is you want to think about how much control you want to give up. There's a couple of key thresholds in terms of ownership percentages. 75%, sort of, if you own 75% and an investor comes in for less than 25%, you still have effective control over the whole business. That's the threshold at which, if they go over 25%, they almost get a veto right over key decisions, as in changes in the nature of the business, things like that. While if you've got 70.1%, you still have controls over that. There's a few minor little bits and pieces they get, but it's really negligible in the scheme of things. The next threshold is 50%. Of course, that's where you have majority control of the business, or not, as the case may be. At that stage, the investor will have veto controls, as discussed, but you'll still be able to, majority run the business. Caveat both of those thresholds, and as we'll see with the Ice Angels example, that you can agree different terms, as always. You can give them directors, the right to appoint directors, you can restrict your ability to make decisions on certain matters. Basically, it's the flexibility gives you a whole list of things you can change or not change, as the case may be. But as a general rule of thumb, those are the thresholds you should be aware of and think about. One mentioned dilution mission. So with the flexibility around these agreement otherwise, you can run into issues around sort of preferential rights that the investor gets over the founders. This could be in terms of distributions, could be in terms of, if it comes to a liquidation scenario, they get their money up first before you. And we talked about veto rights on key decisions. They could require you, if triggering event happens, to basically have the company buy them back. Again, it's a way of protecting their capital. There's various other protections that you can build in, and with director appointments, etc., they might have it so that you can't pass a board decision without their director agreeing. So they can hand it up with a lot of control. One other thing to note is with the early stage investors in equity, it can actually harm your ability to raise funds later. Because the early stage guys want so much protection, they might have anti-dilution rights, they might have preemptive rights where they get first dibs on any further capital raises, which gives them more control of your company. They might go from that 25% up to 50 or whatever it might be. Again, they might have approval rights. They might not like that new investor you've lined up and not let them come in. All things like that. So there are some downsides of it, and basically you have to try and assess between debt and equity. Well, I mean, obviously your key one's going to be what can I get? What is who's offering what money? But once they are sort of willing to lend you money, what makes most sense for how you achieve your purpose? What your enterprise can afford? What you're willing to give up in terms of control and profits and things like that. So I mean that's going to be personal to any particular enterprise, but things you need to sort of think about when you're going out looking for capital. Sources of capital, very similar to debt. Your founders, your 3Fs, your angels, your venture capital. It's a bit broader with your venture capital. You've got things like Stephen Tyndall's K1W1 fund, Kiwi fund. They've got New Zealand Venture Investment Fund, things like that. Mentioned the Provincial Development Unit from the government. Again, you've got the public offers and the smaller folks' ability there. You've got stock markets when you get in a bit bigger. Not just the NZX though, there's a market called unlisted, which again has lesser requirements than NZX, less expensive to list on, but gives your investors a chance to trade shares and things like that. One other thing I want to mention for both debt and equity, which is in my view a pro, but it comes with some cons, is both of these ways of raising capital tends to bring in outside investors. So it's not just you anymore, not just you and your friends, or people who are really, really dedicated to this. And that can bring in quite a high level of discipline, which may or may not have been there before. So it brings in things like, what's the business plan? Have we written it down? Do the people who work in the business, the key people, do they have employment agreements? If intellectual property is a thing, is that all secured and within the business? And maybe some annual reporting obligations around the financials, all this sort of thing, which you see in startups across the board, who they just haven't necessarily got around to it. They're too busy running the business. Everything's working fine. Nobody's really asked the question. And this can be sort of more prevalent in the equity space when you've got a director, now a third-party director sitting on your board, and they're asking all these hard questions, and it's like, oh, do we have a customer contract with this $1 million supplier? No, it's just a handshake. And so, and it happens. I mean, and that $1 million is potentially a small threshold considering some we've seen on handshake basis. So the discipline is actually a real benefit in my view, because even though it costs time and money to comply with, it actually makes the enterprise more attractive to investment later on. So it's almost bringing in some of the skills that Amber's alluded to really polish up your enterprise and make it attractive to a much broader range of investors. So I think that's quite a benefit as well. So I'm just checking how much time I've got. About 2 minutes. So the last thing I wanted to cover was grants, very briefly. So just flicking to the right page of my notes. basically, you generally know what a grant is. It's effectively free money. That's a good thing, usually for a specific purpose, which again is usually a good thing. Can be a challenge if it's only one small part of your purpose versus the overall thing, overall purpose. So you might have a little bit of conflict there, but you'll generally know what you're getting into when you're willing to accept that money. Again, grants can provide some of this discipline I was talking about, because you have to go through a whole application process, and there's various criteria you have to meet. As Steven said, for a charity, what's your charity number? If you haven't been through that process, all of a sudden you have to go away, get everything ready, and become a charity. So, and that's a process in itself. The grants do allow you to focus on your mission. There's usually no requirement to repay. Some we've seen said you have to do X, Y, and Z. If you don't, then you have to repay part or all of it. So that is possible. Usually not as onerous as a banking covenant, because you only agree to those things if they're within your control. Other downsides of them can be quite tight time frames to the application, and sometimes in terms of spending them, you can have some time frames, and obviously actually doing business gets in the way. The costs, management time, etc. of reporting on how you're complying with it, and the age-old problem with social enterprises, impact investing, is how do you measure your impact? And that's a much larger, bigger discussion, but the grant funders tend to want to know, what have you achieved? Have you given 5 jobs to 5 good guys who've just come out of prison? I mean, how do you measure it? What are the specific things you can tick off? And where do these come from? You got your philanthropy. I can't say the word, philanthropy. So things like your family offices, wealthy individuals, large businesses. We've also got public sector, Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, Callaghan Innovation, people like that. Members of the public, of course, donations, good little pages, things like that. I actually wanted to touch on one of the points you mentioned earlier, Stephen, in terms of having to have the charity number at the top. I was having a discussion with the trustee of a big commercial fund, effectively, and he said, we give to these charities, etc. And I sort of challenged him on it. It's like, well, why do you just give to charities? Is there anything in your trust deed or your funding documents that means you can't give to others? And he said, no, it's just, we've never sort of looked at it. We've never, had cause to consider it, and it's easy. It's, I can just tick the box. But he was open to the discussion, as in he's like, there's no reason why we can't consider this. So there is a bit of an education aspect still ongoing, as sort of, again, Stephen was referring to earlier. Yeah, getting that paradigm shift and opening those doors to more funding, which, obviously obviously if you're getting funding from charity, it's going to have to be used for charitable purposes, and so that's going to cut out that segment. But there are a lot of, still can't say that word. That those entities that aren't necessarily locked into charities. So I'm out of time, but so that was quick, real high level. Happy to discuss any of that, and I'd be really keen to run you through the Ice Angels example if you've got time to hang around.
And I'd love to just pick up on one or two things, because we don't want you to go away from this session thinking it's difficult. The law is difficult, and there's too many things to think about. The real value that the law can bring is actually to have a rigor to setting up your social enterprise in the right way. And so I think it's important to step back, look at the avocados. We're trying to grow trees here. Don't get too bogged down in the detail. The real thing that can be empowering if you approach it right is, what is your mission? So traditionally, a company doesn't have to state what its mission is. In all the social enterprise constitutions I'm drafting now, I'm forcing the clients to articulate it as cause number 2. Cause number 1 is, we are a social enterprise. Cause number 2 is, our mission is 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you can actually, the point is, the tool of the law can become helpful to advance and achieve what the social enterprise is after. So don't go away sort of thinking, oh, there's too many options or whatever. It's actually, how can we use it to empower you to achieve what you want to do? But having said that, I would just want to pick up on something you hinted at, which is there are rules that apply. And sometimes I think social enterprises think, well, we're just small, we don't need to comply with this thing. But there's this thing called the Financial Markets Conduct Act, which applies to everyone. So please don't go away and just start raising money. And there's warning statements that have to go on documents if they go to a certain number of people. And wholesale investors is a whole category of type of investor. So you need to make sure that you are complying. And I see it all the time where people have come to me and they say, yeah, I raised 150,000 already. I'm like, okay, where's the documents? A little bit like what you're saying is, and ultimately the point of this is it will be helpful when you do become hugely successful if you can point and say, well, the board minutes right from the start are in this folder. And this is how we made decisions. It's the rigor that comes from that. So the law can actually be a useful tool to help you on your way. But also, as you've heard, there's many options. So one plug I want to put in is to look at sources like crowdfunding Pledge Me. I think what they're doing is really great, and you should have a look at their website, because what they're doing is empowering a new way to fund things. So in Littleton in Christchurch, there's a group called OHU, which wants to empower community ownership of a building. So I've been working with Camilla Young, and we've gone through a Pledge Me process, and she's just raised $500,000 from 300 and something investors. So some of them invested $100, some invested much more, but the point is it was used as these are tools. It was a tool to empower the community to actually be involved in achieving what this social enterprise is after. So I think it's just really good to emphasize it.
What's the name of the example?
It's called OHU, O-H-U, and the location is Colette's Corner. So they're going to be building a communal ownership. It's an example of this new paradigm that I keep talking about, but I actually think it is on the way. And another example of the new paradigm is impact investing, which I think we're going to see more of from traditional community funders who you would have gone to and said, give me a grant, please. I think in the future, you'll probably see they're more open to, we'll invest 10,000 in you and actually have some impact through that. Yeah.
I'd like to add, a real fan of the crowdfunding model, because not only does it allow your existing customers to have a stake in your business or support you, it also opens you up to the crowdfunding universe, as in there's a whole bunch of potential customers who see, hey, I've never heard about this enterprise. All of a sudden they become customers as well. So you can actually not just get funding, but also a bigger customer base.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
And there's more than just plenty.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
there is that was
Yeah, there is
just
for
because
sure.
they did both debt and equity, but there's plenty of course.
Yeah. So I think both Gareth and I, we have the idea that we want to be part of building an ecosystem here in New Zealand, because we see the potential for New Zealand to be a world leader of social enterprise. So part of that is actually resourcing and giving amazing information and tools. We haven't even touched on Te Ao Māori and how that might inform and actually empower us to be completely different to other parts of the world. But if you look at many, many concepts, which is just part of life, it's hugely valuable as a source of wisdom for us going forward. So I brought a few resources along. I'm happy to email this book out to anyone who asks me. And I brought a few little brochures about structures, about IP and protecting it. And then we did this Startups Legal Toolkit, which sets out about 15 chapters on the things that you might want to know if you're in the startup phase. So these are all just PDFs for free. Like, that's a way to hopefully help empower what's going on already. And then if it's okay, just hand these out. And take one and pass it on. And this is the podcast that I've been doing. So it's called Seeds. And on the back, there is a seed. So go away and plant it and see what grows, a mystery plant. But this is hopefully helping to resource the ecosystem of startups and entrepreneurs. The only danger is that if you listen to it, you'll be challenged, because these are all people who've changed their life courses oftentimes. We're in corporate and then switched to this new paradigm, new ways of thinking. So I'm trying to grow the number of people who know about this as a resource, and you all are my potential ambassadors if you enjoy it, to help spread the word. So that's my little plug. Yeah.
Stephen, are those PDFs available via you?
Yeah, it's probably easiest if you email me. I think they're going to be downloadable with Akina at some point if they're not already. But yeah, I'll send them. But if you email me, it's easy for me just to send it back. So yeah. If you Google, my name's unusual, so you'll find me. But it's just Steven Moe at parryfield.com. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. There we go. Yeah, I just became a partner last week, so it's kind of weird for me to see that label. But yeah, it's kind of cool because the law firm is recognized, because I do a lot in this impact area, so it's kind of unusual area to be trying to build a career, but hopefully can keep pushing along with that. So yeah. So we just want to say thank you so much for coming today, and we are going to put it up on the web, so that if you know people who would be interested, we'll make it available probably through Akina. And but thank you, and good day.
Yeah,